A black boy was accused of not paying for his lunch at school, but what his mother did the next day left everyone in shock. The autumn morning started like any other at Jefferson Middle School. Marcus Johnson adjusted his worn backpack as he walked through the crowded hallways, trying to stay invisible among the sea of students rushing to their first classes. At 13, he had already mastered the art of blending in, not too fast, not too slow, eyes down, shoulders slightly hunched. "Yo, Marcus," James called out, jogging to catch up with his best friend. "Did you finish that science project? Mr. Wilson's gonna kill me if I don't turn it in today." Marcus managed a small smile. "Yeah, finished it last night. Mama helped me after her shift." He pulled out his carefully assembled project on photosynthesis from his backpack. James's eyes lit up. "Man, your mom's the best. Even after those crazy hospital hours, she still helps you with homework?" "She says education is everything," Marcus replied, pride seeping into his voice. "Says it's the one thing nobody can take away from you." The first few classes dragged by slowly. Marcus excelled in most subjects, especially math, but he kept his hand down during discussion. Experience had taught him that standing out wasn't always a good thing. During English class, he sat near the back, quietly taking notes while Mrs. Thompson discussed To Kill a Mockingbird. "Marcus," Mrs. Thompson called unexpectedly, making him jump slightly. "What do you think about the way Tom Robinson was treated in the novel?" The class turned to look at him, and Marcus felt his throat tighten. I think it wasn't fair, ma'am. They judged him before knowing the truth." "Excellent observation," she nodded, but Marcus barely heard her praise. His mind was already racing ahead to lunch period, calculating the minutes until he could escape the attention. Between classes, Marcus checked his phone, finding a message from his mother sent early that morning. "Baby, transferred your lunch money. $50 should last you 2 weeks. Work hard and be good. Love you, Mama." He smiled, thinking about how she must have sent it right before collapsing into bed after her night shift. His mother, Tamika Johnson, had been working as a nurse at Memorial Hospital for the past decade, taking the night shift so she could see Marcus off to school in the mornings and help with homework before heading to work. The hallways grew more crowded as lunchtime approached. Marcus walked alongside James, listening to his friend ramble about the latest video game he was saving up for. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the locker. "Watch where you are going." A tall 8th grader shoved a smaller boy, sending his books flying across the floor. Marcus instinctively stepped forward to help gather the scattered papers, earning a glare from the bully. "Got something to say, Johnson?" "Leave it," James whispered, tugging at Marcus's sleeve. "Not worth it." Marcus hesitated, then backed away. His mama always told him to stand up for what's right, but she also taught him to pick his battles wisely. He helped the younger student collect his things once the bully had moved on. "Thanks," the boy mumbled, clutching his books to his chest. "No problem," Marcus replied softly. "Just try to stay clear of Tommy. He's always looking for trouble." As they approached the cafeteria, the familiar smell of institutional food filled the air. Today's menu featured what the school optimistically called chicken parmesan, along with overcooked vegetables and a carton of milk. Marcus got in line with James, their stomachs growling after a long morning of classes. "Man, I can't wait for summer," James sighed, eyeing the lunch options without enthusiasm. "My uncle promised to teach me how to grill proper burgers." 3 more months, Marcus agreed, shuffling forward as the line moved. He could see Miss Peterson at the register, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, lips pursed as she processed each student's payment with mechanical efficiency. The cafeteria was a large, noisy space with long tables arranged in neat rows. Cliques had their established territories, the athletes near the windows, drama kids by the stage entrance, and the rest of the student body filling in the spaces between. Marcus and James usually sat somewhere in the middle, neither popular nor unpopular, just another pair of 7th graders trying to navigate the complex social hierarchy of middle school. "Hey, did you hear about the field trip to the Science Museum?" James asked as they inched closer to the front of the line. "Mom said she'd sign my permission slip if I keep my grades up." Marcus nodded, already knowing he probably wouldn't go. Field trips meant extra expenses, and even though his mother never complained about money, he understood their situation well enough. He said noncommittally, "Haven't asked Mama yet." Finally, They reached the front of the line. James went first, quickly punching in his code and moving through. Marcus stepped up to the keypad, entering his student ID number with practiced. He balanced his tray carefully, waiting for the familiar beep of approval. Instead, Miss Peterson's voice cut through the cafeteria chatter. Here is no money in your account." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. "That's impossible," he said quietly, aware of the growing line behind him. "My mom put money in this morning. She texted me." Miss Peterson's expression hardened. "The system shows no payment. Step aside so others can pay for their lunch." "But I can show you the text," Marcus protested, reaching for his phone with trembling hands. The noise in the cafeteria seemed to dim as more students turned to watch the scene unfold. "A text proves nothing," Miss Peterson declared, her voice rising. Here is your lunch receipt." Marcus's mind raced. He knew his mother had made the payment. She never forgot, not once in all his years at school. "Please, can you check again? Maybe the system's slow today." James hovered nearby, looking uncomfortable. "I can spot you, Marcus," he offered. But Miss Peterson shook her head. "That's not allowed. One student cannot pay for another." Her eyes narrowed as she studied Marcus. "Unless you are trying to get a free meal." The accusation hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Marcus felt his face burning as whispers rippled through the growing audience. Some students had their phones out, and he knew this moment would probably end up on social media before the day was over. "I am not," he started to say, but his voice cracked. The familiar weight of injustice settled on his shoulders, something he'd felt before but never quite like this. His mother's words echoed in his head. "Hold your head high, baby. Don't let them see you break." Miss Peterson reached for his tray. "I'll have to confiscate this food since you can't pay for it." With deliberate slowness, she lifted the tray from his hand. The cafeteria had grown eerily quiet, all eyes focused on the scene. "But my mama..." Marcus tried one more time, his voice barely above a whisper. "Come with me," Miss Peterson ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We'll need to discuss this with Principal Robert." As Marcus stepped out of line, he caught glimpses of different reactions among his classmates. Some looked away, embarrassed for him. Others whispered behind their hands, and a few even snickered. Tommy, the bully from earlier, made a show of counting his own lunch money with a smirk. James stood helplessly to the side, mouthing, "I am sorry," as Marcus was led away. The sound of his untouched lunch being dumped into the trash echoed in his ears, a final indignity in what had become a public spectacle. Walking through the cafeteria felt like an eternity. Each step seemed to take tremendous effort, and Marcus focused on controlling his breathing, just like his mother had taught him during anxiety attacks. "In through your nose, out through your mouth, baby. Nobody can take your dignity unless you let them." Miss Peterson walked slightly ahead of him, her shoes clicking against the linoleum floor with military precision. She hadn't even bothered to verify his claim about the text message or check the system again. The realization made his stomach clench with a mixture of hunger and anger. As they approached the cafeteria doors, Marcus heard someone whisper, "Bet his mom didn't really send the money." Another voice added, "They're always trying to get something for free." The words stung, but Marcus kept walking, his back straight despite the growing pressure behind his eyes. He wouldn't cry. Not here, not now. His mother worked too hard, sacrificed too much, for him to break down over this injustice. The hallway leading to the principal's office seemed longer than usual. Each step echoed in the empty corridor, a sharp contrast to the muffled sounds of laughter and conversation fading behind them in the cafeteria. Marcus's mind raced with thoughts of his mother, how tired she must be after her night shift, how proud she always was of him, how this would break her heart. Miss Peterson opened the office door without knocking. "Mrs. Garcia," she addressed the secretary, "we have a situation that requires Principal Roberts' immediate attention." The secretary looked up from her computer, her eyes moving from Miss Peterson to Marcus, then back again. Something in her expression softened when she saw him standing there, but she merely nodded and pressed the intercom button. "Mr. Roberts, Miss Peterson is here with a student. She says it's urgent." The response came quickly, "Send them in." As Marcus followed Miss Peterson into the principal's office, he couldn't help but think about how differently this day had started. with his mother's loving text message and the absolute certainty that she had, as always, taken care of everything he needed. Now, standing before Principal Roberts' desk, he felt that certainty crumbling under the weight of adult authority that seemed determined to believe the worst of him. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence, marking the exact moment when Marcus Johnson, a 13-year-old honor roll student, would be accused of trying to steal a $3.5 school lunch. The injustice of it all sat heavy in his empty stomach, but he stood tall, channeling every ounce of dignity his mother had instilled in him. The real storm, he knew, was yet to come. Principal Roberts sat behind his large desk, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. The office walls were covered with educational certificates and student achievement awards, but they offered no comfort to Marcus now. "Miss Peterson, what seems to be the problem?" Mr. Roberts asked, folding his hands on the desk. "This student attempted to obtain lunch without payment, Miss," Peterson stated firmly. When confronted, he claimed his mother had transferred money this morning, but the system shows no such payment. Marcus felt his hands trembling. "Sir, I can prove it. My mama sent me a text." "A text message is not official documentation," Miss Peterson interrupted. "The fact remains that you attempted to take food you hadn't paid for." Principal Roberts sighed, removing his glasses. "Marcus, this is a serious accusation. You've never been in trouble before, which makes this situation particularly concerning." "Please, just call my mama," Marcus pleaded. "She works at Memorial Hospital. She sent the money before her shift ended." The principal nodded slowly, reaching for his phone. "Yes, we'll need to contact your mother about this incident." He paused, looking at Marcus's file on his computer. "It says here she works night shifts?" "Yes, sir. She just got home a few hours ago. She always transfers my lunch money before she sleeps." As Principal Roberts dialed the number, Marcus's heart sank. He knew his mother would be sleeping after her exhausting 12-hour shift. The call went to voicemail, just as he expected. "Mrs. Johnson, this is Principal Roberts from Jefferson Middle School. We have a situation involving Marcus and an attempted lunch theft. Please call us back as soon as possible to discuss this matter." The word theft made Marcus flinch. "It wasn't theft," he said, his voice stronger than before. "I would never steal. My mama raised me better than that." Miss Peterson made a dismissive sound. "The evidence suggests otherwise." Just then, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Garcia, the secretary, poked her head in. "Mr. Roberts? James Williams is here. He says he has information about the situation." James entered nervously, clutching his phone. "Sir, I just wanted to say, Marcus always pays for his lunch, every day, and he tried to show Miss Peterson the text from his mom, but she wouldn't look at it." Principal Roberts raised an eyebrow. "While I appreciate your loyalty to your friend, James, this is between the administration and Marcus's family." "But, sir—" "Thank you, James. You can return to lunch now." After James left, the office fell into uncomfortable silence. Marcus stood there, hunger gnawing at his stomach, as the adults discussed his case as if he weren't even in the room. Given the circumstances, Principal Roberts finally said, "We'll need to document this incident. Miss Peterson, please write up a detailed report. Marcus, you'll receive lunch detention for the rest of the week." "But I didn't do anything wrong," Marcus protested, his voice cracking. "Young man," Miss Peterson said sharply, "your attitude isn't helping your case." The bell signaling the end of lunch period rang, and Marcus realized he'd spent the entire time in the office. His stomach growled loudly in the quiet room. "You may return to class," Principal Roberts said, making a note in his computer. "And Marcus, I suggest you make sure your lunch account is properly funded from now on." Walking back to class, Marcus felt numb. The hallways were filling with students, some of whom pointed and whispered as he passed. His phone felt heavy in his pocket. That morning's text from his mother, now a painful reminder of how quickly things could go wrong. In his next class, advanced math, Marcus couldn't focus. The numbers blurred on the page as he thought about his mother, sleeping at home after her long night of helping others. unaware of how her son had been treated. The shame and injustice of it all made his eyes burn, but he refused to let the tears fall. "Marcus, the answer to question 7?" Mr. Chen asked, snapping him back to reality. I am sorry. Could you repeat the question?" Some students snickered. Marcus heard Tommy whisper to another student, "Guess he can't steal the answers like he tried to steal lunch." The rest of the school day passed in a haze. In each class, Marcus felt the weight of stares and whispers. By the time the final bell rang, the story had grown and morphed. Some were saying he'd tried to steal food every day. Others claimed he'd gotten aggressive with Miss Peterson. As he packed up his books, James approached his desk. "Want to come over? Mom made cookies yesterday." Marcus shook his head. "Thanks, but I should get home. Mama will be up soon and—" His voice trailed off. "It's gonna be okay," James said, trying to sound confident. "Your mom will fix this. She always knows what to do." Walking home alone, Marcus felt the full weight of the day settling on his shoulders. The autumn air had turned chilly, and he zipped up his jacket, the one his mother had bought him after working extra shifts last month. Everything he had, everything he was, came from her hard work and sacrifice. And now, because of some computer glitch or system delay, he'd been labeled a thief. As he approached their small but well-kept house, Marcus saw his mother's car in the driveway. His stomach tightened. She would still be sleeping, unaware of the message waiting on her phone. Unaware that her son had gone hungry, had been humiliated, had been accused of theft, all because no one would take a moment to listen, to check, to believe. Marcus quietly unlocked the front door, trying not to wake her. But as he stepped inside, he heard movement from the kitchen. His mother was already up, and soon she would check her phone. Soon she would know. And then everything would change. The day that had started so normally was about to become anything but. Marcus stood in the hallway, his backpack heavy with books and heavier with unspoken words, waiting for the moment when his mother would discover what had happened to her son. The clock ticked steadily on the wall, counting down to a confrontation that would shake Jefferson Middle School to its very foundation. Marcus stood frozen in the hallway, hearing his mother move around in the kitchen. The familiar sound of coffee brewing filled the air. She always needed a cup before heading back to the hospital for another night shift. His stomach growled painfully, reminding him of the lunch he never got to eat. "Baby, is that you?" Tamika called out. Her voice was warm, still a bit groggy from sleep. "Yes, Mama," he answered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Come tell me about your day. I am making some sandwiches before work." Marcus walked into their small but spotless kitchen, his shoulders hunched. Tamika Johnson stood at the counter, still in her sleeping clothes, an old Memorial Hospital t-shirt and comfortable pants. Her hair was wrapped in a silk scarf, and despite only getting a few hours of sleep, her eyes were alert and loving as she looked at her son. "Baby, what's wrong?" she asked immediately, maternal instinct picking up on his distress. "Did something happen at school?" Before Marcus could answer, her phone buzzed on the counter. His heart sank as she reached for it, knowing what she was about to hear. "Let me just check my messages real quick," she said, pressing play on the voicemail. Marcus watched as his mother's expression changed from curiosity to confusion, and then to something he'd rarely seen, pure anger. The principal's voice filled the kitchen. "Mrs. Johnson, this is Principal Roberts from Jefferson Middle School. We have a situation involving Marcus and an attempted lunch theft. Please call us back as soon as possible to discuss this matter." The silence that followed was deafening. Tamika's hand tightened around her phone, her knuckles turning white. "What lunch theft?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Marcus's words tumbled out in a rush. "Mama, I tried to tell them you put money in my account this morning. Miss Peterson wouldn't even look at your text. She made me go to the principal's office and threw away my food, and everyone was watching. And—" "Slow down, baby," Tamika interrupted, pulling out a kitchen chair. "Sit down and tell me everything, from the beginning." As Marcus recounted the day's events, Tamika's expression grew darker. She immediately pulled up her banking app, navigating to a recent transaction. "Here it is," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. 6:45 this morning. $50 transferred to Jefferson Middle School lunch program. She turned the phone screen toward Marcus, showing him the confirmation. They didn't even check, Mama, Marcus said quietly. Miss Peterson just assumed. She assumed my baby was a thief, Tamika finished, standing up abruptly. She began pacing the small kitchen, her nurse's training evident in her methodical thinking. Did you eat anything at all today? Marcus shook his head. Lord, give me strength, Tamika muttered, opening the refrigerator. She pulled out leftovers from the previous night's dinner, chicken, rice, and green beans. As she heated a plate for Marcus, she fired off a quick text to her supervisor at the hospital. Mama, what are you doing? Texting Sarah to cover my shift tonight, she replied, her fingers moving quickly over the phone screen. Some things are more important than work, and this is one of them. But Mama, you need those hours, Marcus protested, knowing how tight money could be. Tamika turned to her son, her eyes fierce with love and determination. What I need is for my child to be treated with respect. What I need is for those people to understand that they can't treat any child this way, let alone my baby. Her phone buzzed with a response. Sarah can cover tonight, she announced, setting a plate of hot food in front of Marcus. Eat now, then we're going to handle this. As Marcus ate, Tamika sat at the table with her laptop, pulling up emails and documents. Baby, tell me exactly what time this happened. Around 12:30, during regular lunch period. Tamika nodded, making notes. And who all was there? Miss Peterson, then Principal Roberts. And James tried to help, but they sent him away. The kitchen fell quiet, except for the sound of Tamika's typing and Marcus's fork against the plate. Finally, she looked up, her expression determined. First thing tomorrow morning, we're going to that school, she declared. But tonight, we're gathering evidence. She picked up her phone again, this time calling her friend who worked in the school district's IT department. Linda, it's Tamika Johnson. I need a favor. Yes, it's about Jefferson Middle School. I need to know if there were any system delays in processing lunch payments this morning. While she waited for a call back, Tamika printed out her bank statements and the payment confirmation. She organized everything in a manila envelope, her movements precise and purposeful. Mama, Marcus said hesitantly, I am sorry for causing trouble. Tamika stopped what she was doing and turned to her son. Marcus Johnson, you listen to me right now. You did not cause any trouble. You did nothing wrong. Sometimes in this life, baby, people will try to make you feel small. They'll try to make you doubt yourself. But remember what I've always told you? We stand up straight and tell the truth, Marcus recited. That's right. And what else? Our dignity isn't given to us by others. It's ours by right. Tamika's phone rang, Linda calling back. Tamika, I checked the system. There was a processing delay this morning. Several payments didn't show up until after 2 p.m. I am sending you the system log right now. Thank you, Linda, Tamika said, her voice steady but her hands shaking with suppressed emotion. One more thing, can you tell me if the school cafeteria has security cameras? They do. Want me to pull that footage? Please, around 12:30 today. After hanging up, Tamika sat down heavily in her chair. Baby, go do your homework. Mama's got some calls to make. For the next few hours, their small house buzzed with activity. Tamika made calls to the school board, to other parents she knew, to community advocates. She printed documents, highlighted sections, made notes, all while checking on Marcus regularly, making sure he was okay, that he had enough to eat, that he knew he was loved. As evening fell, Tamika sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and her laptop. She'd changed into her scrubs, not because she was going to work, but because she wanted them to see her exactly as she was, a working mother who took care of others for a living while raising her son to be a good man. Marcus, she called out, come here, baby. When he entered the kitchen, she patted the chair next to her. I want you to understand what's going to happen tomorrow. This isn't just about the money, or even about lunch. This is about dignity, about justice, about making sure this never happens to another child. Marcus nodded, looking at all the papers spread across the table. Are you going to get me in more trouble? Tamika's face softened. No, baby, I am going to show them what happens when they mess with the wrong mama's child. But I need you to be strong. Can you do that for me? Yes, Mama. Good. Now, here is what we know. The money was in your account, just delayed in showing up. They had no right to humiliate you, no right to let you go hungry. But more than that, they had no right to assume the worst without checking the facts. She pulled out a particular document, the school's own policy manual. See this? It says right here that in cases of payment disputes, students should be provided with a lunch and the matter resolved afterward. They broke their own rules, baby. Marcus leaned against his mother's shoulder, drawing strength from her presence. What if they don't listen tomorrow? Oh, they'll listen, Tamika said firmly, because I am not just coming as your mama. I am coming as a parent who knows her rights, a nurse who understands policy and procedure, and a woman who's tired of seeing children, any children, treated this way. She began organizing the papers into neat piles, each one labeled and highlighted. The manila envelope that would carry them to school the next day sat ready on the counter. Time for bed, baby, she said finally. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. As Marcus got ready for bed, he could hear his mother on the phone again, her voice strong and clear. Yes, I understand it's late, but this is important. I need to know if there have been any other incidents like this. Yes, I'll hold. Later, as he lay in bed, Marcus heard his mother come to check on him, just like she did every night before her shift. But tonight was different. She wasn't heading to the hospital. Tonight, she was preparing for a different kind of battle. Mama, he called out as she turned to leave. Yes, baby. I am proud of you. In the dim light from the hallway, he saw tears shine in his mother's eyes. I am proud of you too, baby. So proud. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow, we're going to teach some people a lesson about judgment and justice. As Marcus drifted off to sleep, he could still hear his mother moving around the house, gathering evidence, making calls, preparing for what was to come. The familiar sounds were comforting, reminding him that no matter what happened at school, no matter what anyone said or thought about him, he had something many people never get, a mother who would move heaven and earth to protect not just him, but what was right. In the kitchen, Tamika Johnson sat at her table, surrounded by evidence of her son's innocence and the school's prejudice. Her scrubs were pressed and ready for the morning. The manila envelope was packed with damning evidence. Her phone was charged, containing emails, texts, and documentation that would prove her point. She thought about her son, sleeping down the hall, thought about how hard he worked, how careful he was to always do the right thing, thought about how one person's assumptions and another's indifference had humiliated him in front of his peers. Not my child, she whispered fiercely into the quiet kitchen. Not any child. Not ever again. The clock ticked steadily on the wall, counting down the hours until morning. Tamika kept working, kept preparing, kept building her case. She knew that tomorrow would change things, not just for Marcus, but for every child who might face similar treatment. The school had no idea what was coming, but they were about to learn a powerful lesson about prejudice, justice, and the fierce love of a mother for her child. Outside, the night grew deeper, but Tamika Johnson didn't sleep. There would be time for rest later, after justice was served. For now, she had work to do, evidence to gather, and a wrong to right. The manila envelope on her counter grew thicker with each passing hour, filled with the proof that would shake Jefferson Middle School to its foundation. As she worked through the night, Tamika thought about all the other children who might have faced similar treatment but didn't have someone to fight for them. Her determination grew stronger with each document she added to her file. Tomorrow wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about every child who had ever been judged unfairly, every parent who had ever felt powerless, every injustice that had gone unchallenged. The night crept on, and Tamika Johnson prepared for battle, armed not with weapons but with truth, evidence, and the unstoppable force of a mother's love. Tomorrow would be a day Jefferson Middle School would never forget. Around 3 in the morning, Tamika received an email from Linda with the security camera footage from the cafeteria. Her hands trembled slightly as she clicked play, watching her son's humiliation from a new angle. The video showed everything. Miss Peterson's dismissive attitude, the dumped food, the staring students, Marcus's straight back as he walked out despite his embarrassment. "Oh, baby," she whispered, wiping tears from her eyes. She watched it 3 times, making notes of every detail, every witness, every violation of school policy. Her phone buzzed, a text from Sarah at the hospital. "Girl, I got your shift covered for tomorrow too. Make them regret messing with your boy. The whole night shift team's behind you." Tamika smiled, grateful for her colleague's support. She typed back, "Thanks, Sarah. This mama bear's got work to do." Just then, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing his eyes. "Mama, you are still up?" "Can't sleep, baby?" Tamika asked, quickly minimizing the video. Marcus shook his head. "Keep thinking about tomorrow. What if they don't believe us?" Tamika patted the chair next to her. "Come here." When he sat down, she pulled him close. "Let me tell you something my mama told me when I was young." She said, "Truth doesn't beg to be believed. Truth stands tall and waits to be seen." "But they didn't want to see it today," Marcus said quietly. "Then tomorrow, we're going to make them look," Tamika declared. "We've got the bank records, the system logs, the security footage. But you know what's most important?" "What?" "We've got our dignity, and that's something they can't take away, no matter how hard they try." She got up and made him some warm milk with honey, just like she used to when he was little and couldn't sleep. As Marcus sipped his drink, Tamika saw not just her 13-year-old son, but also the man he would become if the world would let him. "Mama," Marcus asked hesitantly, "some kids were saying, this happens all the time, to kids like me." Tamika's heart clenched. "By kids like you, do you mean black children?" Marcus nodded, staring into his milk. "Baby, look at me," Tamika said firmly. "Yes, this happens too often. Yes, some people will look at your skin and make assumptions, but that's why we fight. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone who comes after us." She pulled out one more piece of paper, adding it to her manila envelope. "Every time they expect us to stay quiet, we speak louder. Every time they try to shame us, we stand taller. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, we're going to show them exactly what happens when they underestimate a child's dignity and his mama's determination." Marcus finished his milk, looking more settled. "Can I go with you? To the school in the morning?" Tamika considered this. "You sure you want to?" "Yes, Mama. I want to stand with you." Pride swelled in Tamika's chest. "Then you'll stand with me. Now back to bed. We both need some rest before tomorrow's battle." After Marcus went back to bed, Tamika made one final call to her own mother. "Mama, sorry to call so late." "Baby girl, what's wrong?" Her mother's voice was concerned but strong. Tamika told her everything, voice breaking only once during the story. "You listen to me, Tamika Johnson," her mother said firmly. "You go to that school tomorrow and you show them what we've always known. That dignity isn't just a word, it's a birthright. You make them remember your name." "Yes, Mama." "And Tamika, wear your scrubs. Let them see exactly who they're dealing with, a professional woman who saves lives for a living. Let them see what they refuse to see in your boy." After hanging up, Tamika looked at the clock, 4:30 a.m. In a few hours, she would walk into Jefferson Middle School not as a tired nurse after a night shift, but as a mother with evidence, determination, and righteous anger. They would learn that assuming the worst about her child was the biggest mistake they could have made. She gathered her evidence one final time: bank statements, time-stamped receipts, system logs, security footage, school policies, and documentation of similar incidents she'd gathered through her late-night research. The manila envelope was ready. Finally, Tamika allowed herself a few hours of rest, setting her alarm for 7 a.m. As she drifted off, she thought about her son's words. "I want to stand with you." Yes, they would stand together, mother and son, dignity intact, truth as their shield. The morning would come soon enough, and with it, a reckoning that Jefferson Middle School never saw coming. They had humiliated the wrong child and underestimated the wrong mother. Tomorrow, they would learn what happened when systemic prejudice met a mother's love head-on. In her last moments of consciousness, Tamika whispered a prayer. Not for strength, she had plenty of that, but for change. Real, lasting change that would ensure no other child would ever face what Marcus had faced. Then she slept, her dreams filled with the coming confrontation and the justice it would bring. The morning sun had barely risen when Tamika Johnson pulled into the Jefferson Middle School parking lot, her hospital scrubs crisp and clean, her manila envelope tucked securely under her arm. Marcus sat quietly in the passenger seat, his school uniform perfectly pressed, his back straight with newfound determination. "Remember what I told you, baby?" Tamika asked, turning off the engine. "Yes, Mama. Stand tall, speak truth." That's right. She checked her watch. 7:15 a.m., early enough to catch them before the morning rush. They walked through the nearly empty parking lot, their footsteps echoing in the morning quiet. A few teachers' cars were already there, including Principal Roberts' silver sedan. Perfect. As they approached the front office, Mrs. Garcia looked up from her desk, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of Tamika in her scrubs. "Mrs. Johnson, we weren't expecting you so." "I need to see Principal Roberts immediately," Tamika interrupted, her voice calm but brooking no argument. "And please call Miss Peterson in as well." Let me check if he's available," Mrs. Garcia stammered, reaching for her phone. "Oh, he's available," Tamika stated firmly. "And if he's not, he's about to be." Mrs. Garcia spoke quietly into her phone, her eyes darting between Tamika and Marcus. "Mr. Roberts? Mrs. Johnson is here." "Yes, Marcus's mother." "She's requesting." "Yes, sir." Putting down the phone, she said, "He'll see you in a few minutes. Would you like to take a seat?" "No, thank you," Tamika replied, standing tall. "We'll wait right here. And Miss Peterson?" "I've sent for her." The office was silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock and the distant sound of early morning activity in the school. Tamika stood perfectly still, the manila envelope held firmly in her hands, while Marcus sat in one of the plastic chairs, trying to look smaller than he was. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, Principal Roberts' door opened. "Mrs. Johnson, please come in." "Marcus comes with me," Tamika said. Not a question, but a statement. Inside the office, Principal Roberts sat behind his desk, looking slightly uncomfortable in his perfectly pressed suit. "Mrs. Johnson, I understand you are concerned about yesterday's incident, but—" "Stop right there." Tamika held up her hand. "Before we begin, we're going to wait for Miss Peterson." As if on cue, there was a knock at the door, and Miss Peterson entered, her gray hair still in its severe bun, her expression pinched with early morning irritation. "Now," Tamika said, opening her manila envelope with deliberate slowness, "let's talk about how you humiliated my son yesterday." "Mrs. Johnson," Principal Roberts began, "I understand you are upset, but there are procedures." "Oh, let's talk about procedures," Tamika interrupted, pulling out the first document. "Like your own cafeteria policy, which states clearly that in cases of payment disputes, students should be provided with a lunch while the matter is investigated. Did you follow that procedure yesterday?" Miss Peterson straightened her spine. The system showed no payment. "The system," Tamika cut in, pulling out another document, "had a processing delay yesterday. Several payments didn't show up until after 2 p.m. I have the system logs right here, courtesy of the district IT department." She laid the paper on Principal Roberts' desk, then added another. "Here is my bank statement showing the transfer at 6:45 a.m. yesterday morning. Here is the text message I sent to Marcus confirming the payment. Here is the timestamp showing Miss Peterson never even checked the system a second time." The room fell silent as Tamika continued pulling out documents, laying them one by one on the principal's desk like cards in a winning hand. "But let's talk about what really happened," she continued, her voice growing stronger. Let's talk about how you saw a black child saying his mama had paid for his lunch, and you automatically assumed he was lying. Let's talk about how you publicly humiliated him, threw away perfectly good food, and let him go hungry. Mrs. Johnson, Miss Peterson interjected. You are making assumptions about. No, I am stating facts. And I have one more fact for you. Tamika pulled out a USB drive. The cafeteria security footage. Would you like to watch it together? See how you treated my child? See how you let other students witness his humiliation? Principal Roberts shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mrs. Johnson, if there was a system delay, we apologize for the misunderstanding, but this wasn't a misunderstanding. Tamika's voice was steel wrapped in silk. This was prejudice in action, and it stops today. She turned to Miss Peterson, who had remained standing by the door. You didn't even look at his phone when he offered to show you my text. You didn't check the system again. You didn't follow procedure, you just assumed. Why is that, Miss Peterson? The older woman's face flushed. I have worked in this school system for 20 years. Then you should know better. Tamika cut in. 20 years of experience should have taught you to check, to verify, to treat every child with dignity. Instead, you chose to humiliate my son in front of his peers. Marcus sat quietly beside his mother, watching her defend him with a mixture of awe and pride. This was the same woman who worked 12-hour night shifts saving lives, who helped him with his homework despite her exhaustion, who taught him to hold his head high no matter what. What exactly are you asking for, Mrs. Johnson? Principal Roberts finally asked, his voice careful. I am not asking for anything, Tamika replied. I am telling you what's going to happen. First, you are going to implement proper procedures for handling lunch payment issues. No child, I repeat, no child should ever be humiliated or go hungry because of a system delay. She pulled out another document. Second, I want a written apology to my son, acknowledging that he did nothing wrong and that the school failed to follow its own procedures. Mrs. Johnson, Miss Peterson started to protest. I am not finished, Tamika continued. Third, I want mandatory training for all cafeteria staff on proper procedures and bias awareness. And fourth, I want a review of all similar incidents from the past year. How many other children have been humiliated this way? Principal Roberts leaned back in his chair, studying the documents spread across his desk. These are rather extensive demands. They're not demands, Mr. Roberts. They're requirements for preventing a formal complaint to the school board and a very public discussion about how Jefferson Middle School treats its students. The room fell silent again, broken only by the continued ticking of the wall clock. Principal Roberts looked at the documents, then at Miss Peterson, then back at Tamika. Very well, he said finally. We'll need some time to. You have until the end of the school day, Tamika stated firmly. I've already taken today off work, and I am prepared to stay right here until this is resolved. Miss Peterson's face had gone from flushed to pale. Mr. Roberts, surely you are not going to let a parent dictate. Miss Peterson, Principal Roberts interrupted. I suggest you take some time to review these documents. We'll discuss this further in private. Tamika stood, gathering her remaining documents. I'll be in the front office. Marcus needs to get to class, but I'm staying right here until this is resolved. As they walked out of the principal's office, Marcus whispered, Mama, you were amazing. Baby, we're just getting started, Tamika replied, her voice low but firm. Go to class. Hold your head high. Mama's got this. Throughout the morning, Tamika sat in the front office, her posture perfect despite her exhaustion, the manila envelope never leaving her side. She watched as teachers and students filtered in, as Miss Peterson was called back to the principal's office multiple times, as worried whispers spread through the administrative staff. Around lunchtime, Principal Roberts' door opened again. Mrs. Johnson, we're ready to discuss solutions. Tamika stood, smoothing her scrubs. The battle wasn't over, but the tide had turned. As she walked back into the principal's office, she thought about all the other parents who had fought similar battles, all the children who had faced similar humiliation. Today wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about changing a system that too often assumed the worst about children who looked like her son. The afternoon would bring more discussions, more negotiations, more demands for change. But for now, Tamika Johnson stood tall in her hospital scrubs, armed with evidence and righteousness, ready to continue the fight for her son's dignity and the dignity of every child who would come after him. Inside Principal Roberts' office, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. Miss Peterson sat in a chair, her usual confident demeanor replaced by a tense silence. A new figure had joined them, Dr. Martinez, the district's assistant superintendent. Mrs. Johnson, Dr. Martinez began, extending her hand. I've reviewed the situation and your documentation. I want you to know we're taking this very seriously. Tamika shook her hand firmly. I am glad to hear that. What steps are you prepared to take? Dr. Martinez pulled out a document. We've drafted a comprehensive response plan. First, regarding Miss Peterson. Miss Peterson's head snapped up, her face paling further. She will be placed on administrative leave, pending a full review of cafeteria procedures and past incidents. Mr. Roberts, Miss Peterson protested, you can't possibly. It's not Mr. Roberts' decision, Dr. Martinez interrupted firmly. This comes from the district level. Tamika watched silently, her face composed but her heart racing. This was more than she'd expected. The district taking direct action showed they understood the gravity of the situation. Principal Roberts cleared his throat. We've also drafted the formal apology to Marcus, which will be read during tomorrow's morning announcements and sent home to all parents. He slid a paper across the desk. Tamika picked it up, reading carefully. Yesterday, a student was wrongly accused of attempting to obtain lunch without payment. The student, Marcus Johnson, had in fact paid for his lunch through proper channel. Due to a system delay and failure to follow proper procedures, he was unjustly accused and humiliated. Jefferson Middle School acknowledges this grave error and apologizes unreservedly to Marcus and his family. The language needs to be stronger, Tamika said, looking up. It needs to acknowledge the broader implication. Dr. Martinez nodded. What changes would you suggest? For the next hour, they worked on revising the statement, making it clear that this wasn't just about a system delay, but about assumptions, prejudice, and the need for systemic change. Here is one more thing, Tamika said, once they'd finalized the statement. I want to be part of the committee that reviews and updates the cafeteria procedure. Principal Roberts started to object, but Dr. Martinez held up her hand. Actually, that's an excellent idea. We need parent perspective, and you clearly understand both policy and procedure from your medical background. As the meeting wrapped up, Miss Peterson stood abruptly. I suppose my 20 years of service mean nothing, she said bitterly. Tamika turned to her. Your 20 years of service should have taught you compassion, Miss Peterson. Instead, they taught you to judge children based on assumptions. That's why we're here today. The afternoon sun was starting to slant through the office windows when everything was finally settled. Tamika had her signed agreements, her position on the review committee, and most importantly, justice for her son. As she walked out of the office, she saw Marcus waiting in the hallway. School had ended during their final meeting. Baby, she called, opening her arm. Marcus ran to her, no longer worried about who might be watching. Mama, everyone's talking about it. They say Miss Peterson's leaving. Not leaving, baby, just learning some important lessons. She held him at arm's length, studying his face. You okay? I am better than okay, he said, standing straighter. James said I am lucky to have a mama like you. Tamika smiled, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. No, baby, I am the lucky one. Now come on, we're getting ice cream before I have to go to work tonight. As they walked out of Jefferson Middle School, Tamika noticed the looks of respect from teachers and staff. But more importantly, she saw other parents, especially other mothers, watching her with something like hope in their eyes. Tomorrow would bring changes, a new cafeteria supervisor, new procedures, new awareness. But tonight, Tamika Johnson would go to her shift at Memorial Hospital knowing she'd done more than just defend her son. She'd started a change that would ripple through the school system, protecting other children from similar humiliation. In the car, Marcus turned to her. Mama, remember what you always say about dignity? What's that, babe? That it's not given to us by others, it's ours by right. He paused. Today you made them see that. Tamika reached over and squeezed his hand, her heart full of love and pride. Yes, they had made them see, and more importantly, they had made them change. The next morning at Jefferson Middle School was anything but ordinary. Students filed into their classrooms, buzzing with excitement about the rumors that had spread like wildfire through social media the night before. Marcus walked through the halls with his head held high, no longer trying to be invisible. "Yo, Marcus," James called out, jogging to catch up with his friend. "Man, your mom is legendary. Everyone's talking about what happened yesterday." Before Marcus could respond, the morning announcements crackled over the intercom. Principal Roberts' voice sounded different somehow, more subdued, more serious. "Good morning, students and staff. I have an important announcement to make regarding an incident that occurred in our cafeteria 2 days ago." The classroom fell silent as Principal Roberts read the carefully worded apology that Tamika had helped craft. Marcus sat straight in his chair, feeling the eyes of his classmates on him. "And so we formally apologize to Marcus Johnson and his family. Furthermore, effective immediately, there will be significant changes to our cafeteria procedure." Tommy, the 8th grade bully, turned around in his seat. "Damn, Johnson, your mama really brought the heat." Miss Thompson, their English teacher, quietly wiped a tear from her eye as the announcement continued, detailing the new policies and procedures that would ensure no student would ever go hungry or face humiliation over lunch payments again. When the announcements ended, Miss Thompson stood up. "Class, I think this is a perfect moment to connect back to our discussion of To Kill a Mockingbird. Remember when we talked about standing up against injustice?" The day unfolded differently than any before it. Students who had previously ignored Marcus now smiled and nodded as he passed.